Hey, what's up there, YouTubers? Adjman Synergy coming to you guys here today with another deck tech. So today we're going to be taking a look at a standard build, and it is Bant Midrange. So this deck likes to use both control and aggro in its tactics, and it's going to do it with three of the most powerful colors in the format, which are blue, white, and green. And among those colors, this deck is going to be using some of the more popular and really strong cards to just synergize ultimately and have a really good outcome game after game. So we're going to break it down, but before we get to that, if you guys have any suggestions for decks that you would like to see, please leave that down in the comments below, and I'll take it into consideration for future decks. And remember to check out the playlist in the description below where I have all the previous decks that I've covered, so you can use that as a reference, and also maybe I already covered something that you're trying to suggest, so keep that in mind. So the first thing that we're looking at here is the land base. So we are running 24 lands in here, and we're starting off with Hallowed Fountain, so providing white or blue. So we have a playset of the fountain. From there we have Temple Garden, so we're running a playset of this as well. The shocks are very important, especially for fetching with Farseek. Then we have Sunpetal Grove, so playset of the Grove as well. I think green is really important early game. You want to have at least one source of green mana by turn 2, so you can go into Farseek and then fix from there with whatever is giving you grief. If it's a second source of blue, or if it's, I don't know, double white or something like that. Early game it doesn't really matter too much, but you want to have one source of green earlier on, and then have the appropriate double blue to cast stuff like Jace, Architect of Thought, Tamiyo, and other stuff. So I think that's the more appropriate way to look at how you want to have your lands. From there we have Glacial Fortress. So we're running 3 Glacial Fortress for white or blue. From there we have Hinterland Harbor, so 3 of those as well. And then we have our basics. So with our basics we have 2 planes. I really love the artwork for the Ravnica / Return to Ravnica basic lands. The art just looks really, really nice. 2 islands and 2 forests. So 24 lands. Again, keep in mind you want to have at least one source of green early on. Then you want to work into double blue, and then you should be safe from there with operating this deck. I think the more prominent sources of white comes a little bit later game when you're trying to play off of stuff like Entreat, and it's not a miracle Entreat. So from there we have everything else in the deck. So we're starting off with creatures. We have Centaur Healer, so he's a 3/3 for 3, enters the battlefield and you gain 3 life. I think he's really good against aggro. He seems to work very well against aggro because they're going to be in their best efforts trying to overextend and just win before you can do anything. And Centaur Healer comes in. He's still a really good blocker. He's going to block most things, and he gains you back life, so if you're in the red, he's going to help you get out of that situation. But ultimately, he's really good. I think he's also fairly good against control when it comes to game 1, because if you drop him on turn 3 and control really can't find a way to deal with him in the next like 2 or 3 turns, they're going to take a decent portion of life that, unless they get Thragtusk, if they're running like Bant or something along those lines, maybe if it's 4 color or something like that, if they're not running ways to gain back life, I think Centaur Healer can deal a decent bit of damage early game, which is very good. You want to have that upper hand with a card like Healer, but more so I think he's appropriate for anything aggro based. From there we have our own Thragtusks here, so 5/3 for 5 enters the battlefield and we gain 5 life. With most any deck that's running green, they're going to be running Thragtusk. You can almost assume that they will be, and that's no exception for this deck. We're obviously going to be running Thragtusk. He's so tremendous and so huge, and he just puts a stop to any huge aggro blowouts. Getting you back 5 life. Whenever he leaves the battlefield, you get a 3/3, so he's assuring that you at least have some board presence after a wipe or after trading. So 3 tusks. From there, we have one Sigarda, Host of Herons, so she's a 5/5 for 5 flying, hexproof, making her really hard to deal with. And spells and abilities your opponent's control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. I think the best thing about her is she matches up very, very well against Jund Midrange, which is starting to become very popular. The only time she is definitely sided out is against control, because they have Supreme Verdict, and that's the one definite way. Supreme Verdict and Terminus just gets rid of Sigarda without any problem, but when it comes down to Mizzium Mortars can't do anything with its overload. Bonfire for 5 or more ends up being very unrealistic, even more so when it's being hard cast, but whenever it's off of a miracle, time and time again, they're not really going to be able to have it at the right time that they need it, and Sigarda is going to punish people that are playing stuff like Jund, because they really can't get rid of her effectively enough. They just don't have enough answers. And Liliana can't do anything with her sack ability. So I think that's the big reason why Sigarda is in this build. And I think she's really good for that. But against stuff like Control, there's no need to have her in. Game 1, she may do something, but she'll end up being board wiped. So we just side her out for other things. From there, we have Armada Wurm, so 5/5 for 6. Trample enters the battlefield, and we get a 5/5 green worm with Trample. So for 6 mana, you get 2 5/5s, both with Trample. Really, really big. We're running 2 of these in the build, and really good aggro. Turn 5, turn 6, whenever you drop it, depending on if you've ramped or not. Armada Wurm can be very good, and I think with spot removal, it's much easier to get rid of one of them than it is to just get rid of both. So even if they get rid of one, they're a little bit more safe, but they still have to deal with the other one. So I think that's the great thing about Armada Wurm, is you're getting 2 creatures out of 6 mana, not just one. That's really big. So they're going to have to find a way to deal with both. From there, we have our Planeswalkers, so Jace, Architect of Thought. Hands down, probably one of the best Planeswalkers in the format, especially when it comes to control. 4 loyalty, 4 cost, +1, and until your next turn, whenever a creature your opponent controls attacks you, it gets -1, -0 until the end of the turn. The -2 is like a half factor fiction. You reveal the top 3 cards of your library, and your opponent separates them into 2 piles. You get to choose one, and that one goes into your hand. The other one goes to the bottom of your library. So it's effectively gonna let you dig 3 cards, and it's almost like you're drawing 3, and you just get to keep what's best out of them. There's really no situations, unless it's 2 huge bombs, that you're going to have a problem with choosing between them. Most times, your opponent's going to be at a really huge disadvantage with that half factor fiction with his -2, and you can use it twice, unless you go for his -1 to thwart aggro, or just to keep on putting counters on him. His -6 is also relevant to bribery. You get to search your opponent's library for a card, and then you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So I think that's nice with Jace. He's really good for a lot of different things, but he's really good with utility for that half factor fiction with that -2. Jace is really, really good. So we're running 3 of him, and it's appropriate at what price he's at. He's really played, and he does work whenever you drop him. He gets you things by drawing. From there, we have Tamiyo, so we're running 2 Tamiyos. So she is a 4 loyalty, 5 cost, +1, and you get to tap down a permanent. It doesn't untap during your opponent's next untap step. -2, you draw cards equal to the amount of tapped creatures target player controls, and -8, you get an emblem where you don't have a maximum hand size, and if at any time something goes to the grave that you control, you can put it into your hand instead. So the emblem is ultimately where we're going to be going with Tamiyo, and she's really good because if your opponent's trying to play like Supreme Verdict and stuff like that, big ways to remove cards, especially stuff like Thragtusk, there's almost no way for them to win. Once you get Thragtusk on the board and they're trying to use removal that isn't Terminus or Detention Sphere, or even Oblivion Ring, I guess, but if they're trying to use removal that lets it die, then you're pretty much going to win, because you can just keep on recasting Thragtusk, and you can just play all the things, and your opponent really can't do anything. The Tamiyo emblem is really relevant. From there, we have Garruk Relentless, so we're running 2 Relentless in the build. So he's a 4-cost Planeswalker, 3 loyalty. Garruk Relentless is really nice because he creates 2/2s, so if you can drop him turn 3, he's really nice at just letting you stack the board with a bunch of 2/2s, especially after a Wrath effect like Supreme Verdict. You can Verdict and then just keep on creating more 2/2s for yourself and either prepare for more aggro your opponent has or just get there with dealing 2 damage and just keep on stacking up more tokens all the time. But on his flip side, he can let you search for stuff like Thragtusk if you really need it, and also Armada Wurm for a bigger blowout against stuff that isn't control, because control has no problem with dealing with creatures because it can just board wipe. From there, we have Entreat the Angels, so we're running 2 Entreat the Angels in the build. Miracle cost is really nice. We can even hard cast it. It's XX and triple white for the hard cast, but the miracle cost to it is just double white and 1X, and put X amount of 4/4 flying angel tokens onto the battlefield. So it's another way to have like a win condition. It is very easily dealt with though. Don't assume that you're going to win just because you have Entreat the Angels and you're able to do it for a lot. Control can counter it, and other than that, Mizzium Mortars gets there, Bonfire also gets there, and Sever the Bloodline gets there. But if they don't have those things, which oftentimes they might not, then Entreat will get there. But it's definitely something they have to deal with, and they're going to have to use up their resources of actually having solutions to that problem. They're going to have to use them up on that Entreat, and you can just find other ways to win. From there, we have Sphinx's Revelation, so we're just using one of these, and it's like an improved Blue Sun's Zenith. So X, 1 white, double blue, you gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards. Really good. From there, we have Think Twice, so we're running 3 Think Twice. A pretty self-explanatory card. You draw 1 card, it casts for 2, and flashes back for 3. Just a typical draw spell for the build. Azorius Charm, we're also running 3 Azorius Charm in the build, so 1 white, 1 blue, and you can choose one. You can draw a card, you can put target attacking or blocking creature on the top of its opponent's library, and or on top of the player's library, and also, until the end of the turn, your creatures can gain a lifelink with the other choose one ability. So I think it's overall really good. I think the bulk of where we're going to be using this card is going to be for either drawing or for being able to take one of our opponent's creatures that's attacking and put it back on top of their library. From there, we have Detention Sphere, so we're running a playset of the Sphere. The Sphere is really nice for the 3 mana. It's an Oblivion Ring, but it exiles all copies, which is nice. So against tokens, against your opponent's Entreats, if they're running them, it deals with a lot of stuff, also Planeswalkers. And against control, Detention Sphere can't target Detention Sphere. So, I mean, that's one of the nice things. It's so you don't get into that awkward situation where things are stacking, like, oh, Detention Sphere, your Detention Sphere, that's getting rid of my Jace or something like that. But that's... The Detention Sphere leads into sideboard options that we have against other people's Detention Spheres, so we do have ways to deal with other people's. Supreme Verdict, so we're running 3 of these against aggro. It's not hard to reset the things that we have, especially with Thragtusk, because we get a 3/3 off of him whenever he dies. It's not bad to board wipe, especially if our opponent has a better board state than us. But with stuff like Garruk Relentless, even if you Verdict, you can still stack the board with 2/2s, so... I think Supreme Verdict is really nice against any aggro, anything that likes to stack the board with creatures. And then the last card that we have in the main board is Farseek. So 2 mana, 1 generic, 1 green, and we get to search our library for pretty much Hallowed Fountain or Temple Garden and fix from there with the mana that we need. So that's the main board. Now we are going to take a look at the sideboard options. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at the sideboard here. So in the sideboard we have 1 Supreme Verdict, so this is for more aggro stuff, anything that's really heavy with creatures that we just want to board wipe from there. Also stuff like Junk. I think Junk is fairly huge, and they like to play big things, and you just want to board wipe from there, so Supreme Verdict helps you with that, and having 1 more copy of it is good. From there we have Rest in Peace, so... With Rest in Peace, I think it's really relevant against zombies because they're not going to be playing off of Undying and any whenever it dies type of abilities, stuff like that. So Rest in Peace is good for that, running a 3 of it. And also, it's going to be good for stuff like Reanimator because they're not going to be able to play off of that. So it pretty much shuts down decks like those. And then for stuff like zombies, we can make a comeback with using stuff like Centaur Healer and Thragtusk to make sure that they really don't have a chance of actually bouncing back from dealing damage or just working off of things that are not graveyard interactions to win from there. But I think Rest in Peace is good tech for any graveyard-based stuff, and it doesn't hold us back very much. The big thing with Rest in Peace is that you're not going to be able to work off of Think Twice with the flashback, but I think that's a pretty fair compensation that you can take. You can compensate for not using Think Twice to actually be able to use Rest in Peace and be able to shut down zombie-based stuff and also Reanimator. From there, we have 2 Oblivion Rings, so this is more so against bigger creatures, anything that runs big things that you want to just permanently get rid of. I think Oblivion Ring is good for that. Against Control, we're not necessarily going to be siding it in, even though we can't get rid of their Detention Spheres on our stuff. Oblivion Ring is strictly for bigger creatures. We have different ways to deal with Detention Sphere other than Oblivion Ring. And that way is with Ray of Revelation. So we're running 3 of these. So it's Destroy Target Enchantment. So we're going to be able to get rid of Detention Sphere with it. It's 2 to cast and it has a flashback for 1 green. So we can effectively make sure that the Detention Spheres aren't going to stick. And if they're siding in Oblivion Rings, same goes for those as well. So they're going to have to dissipate Ray of Revelation to actually be able to make sure that we're not able to use it, because Negate's not going to do anything. The flashback becomes relevant for it. So anybody that's running Negates instead of Dissipates in the sideboard or just strictly Negates is going to have a bad time if they're playing Control, because we can still get rid of Detention Sphere with the flashback. So I think Ray is definitely really good. You side him in Game 2, Game 3, and your Planeswalkers are pretty much safe, and you can win with them very effectively. So 3 Rays. From there, we have Jace Memory Adept, so we're running 2 of them in the sideboard, and pretty much just as good as he was against Control in the last season of Standard, he's pretty much that same amount of awesomeness in this season of Standard. So against Control, you just mill them out. He's a win condition, so you're able to just mill for 10 each turn, and you put him on a clock where they have to get rid of him, and they have to have a way to get rid of him that's actually going to resolve, or they basically lose. So Jace is really good for that, and I think he's really awesome against anything that's really slow-based decks, and Control more so than anything else. So 2 Jace. And from there we have 2 Dissipates. So with our Dissipates, it's counter target spell, and you exile it instead of it going to the graveyard. So if it's big stuff like Angel of Serenity or Thragtusk, and you don't want them to use Angel of Serenity whenever it hits into exiling their Thragtusk from their grave, stuff like that, you just don't want stupid stuff like that to happen. So Dissipate is just an easy way to make sure that interactions like that don't happen. So 2 Dissipates just to permanently get rid of something from the game. Really easy way to counter stuff for the 3 mana. And then we have Negate. So Negate is good. More so, I would say, strictly against Control, because it's just 2 mana counter target non-creature spells. So it's going to hit into Planeswalkers. There are other resolutions like Supreme Verdict if they're trying to wipe out your field, if you have like Armada Wurms and Tusks and stuff like that. But Negate's still really good against Control and anything that likes to run a hefty amount of non-creature spells. And it just gets the job done for 2 mana. You can assure that your stuff resolves, especially if you go Entreat and they try to counter it and you leave 2 mana open for Negate and you're able to negate their counter spell. I think that's really good, and it's definitely something to look out for, because you can't assume that they're always going to be in a situation where they don't have the counter spell the moment that you're playing things. Chances are you're going to have a player that knows what they're doing, and you want to have ways to even still be able to come back from that and counter the things that they're trying to counter from you. So, I mean, that's the main board and the sideboard. If you guys need the entire lists, the lists are down in the description below, so you can use them as a reference. If you guys enjoyed this deck tech, please be sure to give it a nice thumbs up, favorite it, and also subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. Until next time, guys, have a wonderful, fun-filled Magic the Gathering day.